Article that I just thought was fantastic called Stephen Miller's Impossible America. It is about the ways different Trump administration policies fit together to promote whiteness in this country. But before we get there, um, can you tell us, Paul, what is the American prospect and why should everybody be as much in love with it as I am?
Claire, first of all, it's a delight to be here to talk with you. Thank you for the opportunity to say a bit about the American Prospect, which I co founded in 1990 with Bob Kuttner and Robert Reich. And amazingly, here it is so many years later, 36 years later, and it's still going. Uh, and we have changed over the years in the way we publish, but we haven't really changed in the underlying rationale, which is to uh, try to understand America better, more thoroughly, to understand politics and power in America, but in the interests of um, creating a plausible and politically effective liberal progressive politics. That's
And
nutshell. And again, we've been doing it. We started out as a quarterly, then went to bi-monthly. We've changed circulations. We've adapted to the new electronic environment, although perhaps not well enough. But we are continuing to try to renew ourselves with younger generations and keep going.
that's fantastic. And listeners, I'm going to put a link to the story that we're talking about today, which will take you to the American Prospect. Explore around. It's a terrific publication. It's free, isn't it, Paul? Online?
Uh, that's true. We don't have a paywall online,
Hmm.
but we do still have a print edition, and and would love people to subscribe to it or become a member and contribute to it. Yes.
And people can donate to your online
Yeah.
presence too. I mean, having run a publication called Public Seminar for many years, that too was free, and we believed that it should be free, but it doesn't cost nothing to put this stuff up. And you clearly have a really good editorial staff too, because you don't have all the typos that I often have in my newsletters. So Paul, let's talk about this piece that you published last week, Stephen Miller's Impossible America. In a nutshell, what were you trying to convey to your reading audience about the ways that white supremacy has played itself out in the White House?
Okay. So I am trying in this article to connect Stephen Miller's anti-immigrant policies with another set of policies that he and his wife have been associated with, pronatalist policies. And together, I argue they represent a kind of strategy that I call white replenishment. And by that term, I mean the reverse of what right wingers think has been the government's practice of racial replacement.
Mhm.
And I come up with this term white replenishment actually from another sociologist, Thomas Jimenez, who's written about immigrants from Mexico uh, and used the concept of ethnic replenishment with the argument that ongoing streams of immigration have helped maintain a sense of connection and continuity of ethnic identity among Mexican Americans in the United States. So this is the reverse. This is white replenishment. This is the idea that there's sort of a whole variety of things that include mass deportations, that include blocking non-white immigration in the future to the United States, eliminating even refugee resettlement, except for white South Africans, and doing a variety of other things to promote white identity and reverse the demographic changes that have been taking place really over the last 30, 40 years in the United States. So
Okay.
that's I think the real agenda is, and
Yep.
immigration is just part of it.
Okay, so there are a couple of very visceral themes in the Trump administration's attacks on people of color and attacks on white women for not having enough babies. One is the idea that all of these black and brown people are eternal foreigners. And that's a narrative that we saw in relation to the Chinese in the 19th century and Japanese, the idea that actually these were unassimilable immigrants. And there's a whole conversation about whether assimilation can actually happen on the right. And we might want to talk about that. But that's a very visceral theme, and it has led to certain kinds of online campaigns, like, for example, the invention of this term angel mom, in which if your child has been killed by an immigrant, you become an angel mom, and they are all white people, right? So there's this visceral fear that is being cultivated of foreigners. And can we just pause on that for a second? In what way has the Trump administration promoted this kind of fear?
Oh, it's promoted it by arguing that immigrants are a source of crime, when in fact all the evidence suggests that crime rates among immigrant groups are lower than among the native born.
Hmm.
Uh, they promote it with vicious stereotypes. Trump calling Somali Americans garbage. I mean, the very language that Trump and Miller use
Right.
is inherently demeaning. And yes, they're clearly suggesting that immigrants are just leeches on the Treasury. I cite evidence in this piece about the fact that the United States government has had a fiscal surplus of very large proportions from immigrants. Immigrants
Mhm.
actually pay more in taxes that they get in benefits. They pay much more into Social Security and Medicare than they get. And there's a study that I linked to that says the US national debt would actually be twice the level had it not been for immigration. It,
Mhm.
it's just one of many false representations about the post 1965 wave of non-European immigration. I just want to mention, for anybody who's interested, there's a terrific book by two economists, Rand Abramisky and Leah Bouston, a book called Streets of Gold, that has a lot of evidence comparing the immigrants of the late 1800s, early 1900s with the recent waves of immigrants. And first of all, contrary to the portrait that Miller and Trump give, our recent immigrants have been very successful economically.
Mhm.
The overwhelming evidence is that they have as high a rate of economic mobility as the European immigrants of the late 1800s and early 1900s. And the book has a variety of kinds of evidence about assimilation.
Mhm.
And it shows, again, that the recent immigrants have been assimilating just as rapidly as immigrants in the past. One thing the United States has been very good at throughout its history, and that is making Americans out of the most diverse people in the world. And we should be confident that we can continue to do that and that people can come here from all over and can contribute materially and culturally, enriching this country. And you look, I mean, I mentioned in passing, just the list of Nobel Prize winners, the list of founders of corporations who have come from these recent waves of immigrants. It's really astounding how much of
Mhm.
a contribution they have made enlarging our country. And what Miller is threatening, one of the reasons I think it's an impossible America that he's after, is that this would be a poorer country. This would be a worse off society if it were not for those immigrants. Let me just mention one thing that came out subsequent to this piece. which is a recent article about what's happened in Japan. So Japan's population has declined by 3 million over the
Hmm.
5 years. It's really quite stunning. Um, Much of rural Japan is being depopulated,
Yes.
but, but the Japanese don't allow for much immigration.
Hmm.
And I have a colleague who follows very closely these developments in Japan, is an expert on birth rates in Japan. And he mentioned to me that there are some people on the right in Japan who actually believe that it would be better for Japan to die with dignity rather than sacrifice its culture by allowing in immigrants. This is nuts. The United States is in a way in a much better position
Yes.
because we have this tradition of
Right.
welcoming, of assimilating immigrants, of expanding culturally to include the many diverse elements they bring to American music, to American food, to I mean this
Right.
it, why not celebrate this? Now, I in saying this, I also just want to mention something else that's in this article and at greater length in another piece that um that I think the Biden administration allowed for the creation of a crisis on the southern border
Hmm.
that lent credibility to Trump's arguments against immigration.
Hmm.
And that was a mistake, and Democrats should not repeat it. It doesn't mean if you're in favor of immigration in general, it doesn't mean that you favor open borders. It doesn't
Right.
mean that just abandon any kind of control. And so if you favor immigration, you really have to convince people that it's under control, that it's being managed, and that they're going to benefit in the long run. You have to make that case, and I think grounds are there for making that case.
I hard agree, and you're even seeing it now on X that various congresspeople, one of whom is I think Anna Paula Luna, who is a Republican from Florida. She has floated an immigration reform bill, and she's being lambasted on X by people to her right, saying she wants open borders, get rid of her, primary
Well,
her now. So the forcing of the open borders, the invasion narrative, the hordes of criminals coming into our country has been very viscerally powerful. I want to turn to another piece, another theme in this article, which is how do you get more white people? If in fact your country's birth rate has flatlined, which essentially the US birth rate has flatlined. It pops up a little and then drops again. How do you get more white people? Okay, there seem to be three ways of doing it. One is you import them. You say, we're letting in 10,000 white South Africans, right? Which I am shocked that nobody has gone to court over this because it strikes me as illegal to define the immigrants you want as white. But 10,000 white South Africans. Okay, you steal white people, adult white people from somewhere else. Second of all, you deport and force people of color to leave so that your ratios actually even out. But that also results in a population drop. The third thing is you force women back into the home and make them have more babies and act like you're doing them a huge favor by saying, this is what you were born for in the first place. Go to it, girls. Um, but these all seem like very weak strategies to me, Paul. How is it that Stephen Miller thinks that together they are actually going to achieve something, or do they intend to achieve anything? Is it all just talk?
well, in this article, I say the anti-immigrant part is for real. The
Yeah.
pronatalism part is for show.
Hmm.
And the so um, they are aiming at negative immigration. They
Yep.
want more immigrants to leave the country than come in.
Yep.
And we may already be at that point. I go through the data in the piece. It's not entirely clear, and that's partly because immigrants who self-deport, who leave for fear of the ICE showing up, or who've been put in the detention centers and don't even want to fight their asylum case because they're so scared of remaining in those death traps. Uh,
Hmm.
there may be more leaving now than are coming in, because also much of the legal immigration has been cut off
Hmm.
by executive orders.
Right.
And many countries in the world can no longer send immigrants to the United States.
Right.
Uh, so, okay, so then on the pronatalist side, um, there's a section of this piece called the empty promise of conservative pronatalism, and basically, I argue that um, the Trump administration and other Republican administrations are ideologically incapable of really doing anything about birth
Hmm.
rate.
Hmm.
No, they're not willing to change public policy enough to direct resources to young families.
Hmm.
And they're certainly not willing to regulate corporations to require them to provide a better balance between, work and family life.
Hmm.
And that's what would be needed in order to make a real difference. There are many young people who would like to have kids who feel they just can't afford it. They can't depend on it, that their lives are too economically precarious.
Hmm.
And that's what you'd have to change in order to give people the confidence to have more kids. And I think that's a legitimate issue. That really um, this this is a generation, that is facing a very uncertain future economically. And what we really need to do is to give them the hope, the security, that will enable them to have the children they want to have.
Right.
Uh, we don't need we don't need the world of the Handmaid's Tale. Um, we don't need this effort to throw things back in time, for women. It's not going to work.
Right.
Um, American families are too dependent on the earnings of women uh, for that to happen. It's just not a plausible strategy. So they're basically, I think conservatives are just going down a road that's hopeless on this issue. Um, and what I think international experience shows is that it's very difficult to affect the birth rate. But I think there are some policies that make a difference. Actually, one policy that has clearly worked is immigration,
Right.
because immigrants tend to have high birth rates. That's
Right.
one of the reasons the US has, for a long time, not been in the position of many other countries like Japan or
Hmm.
and other countries that have low immigrant population. The U.S. with its immigrants has kept up its birth rate, and and
Right.
so these two policies are just at cross purposes.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that seem to feed directly into the replenishment narrative that I'd like to just sort of pick out. One is that in the birth rate conversation, in the pronatalist conversation, one of the things that has emerged is that there are far fewer teenagers having children than there ever were. And I actually find this kind of ironic because it was the thing Republicans were always going after in the 60s, 70s, and 80s is so-called welfare mothers who just had babies so that they could get more money, blah, 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 blah. Horrible racist trope. And now Republicans are like, oh my God, the teenagers have stopped having babies. How did that happen? And so that sort of dovetails with the administration's anti abortion and anti birth control policies. And while the administration has not moved to end the distribution of birth control or end the availability of birth control, we have certainly seen ways in which that availability has been eroded. Is that a deliberate strategy to make pregnancy more ubiquitous, or are these just parallel lines?
Yeah, I think they're parallel lines. I don't think really they're going to get much uh, effect on the birth rate. That
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so I just don't think they're willing to put enough resources uh,
Hmm.
behind this pronatalist policy, like Trump account that that were included in Trump's one big beautiful bill.
Right.
They're pathetic.
Right.
They're a deposit of $1,000 that can be drawn upon a child is age 8. They're just the idea that this would affect the birth rate is
Right.
the no way is that going to
Right.
happen. And I don't really think that they're able to interfere with contraceptives. I don't think that's I just
Well,
that
yeah.
just cannot imagine what's going along.
Yeah, and thinking about this baby bonds thing, I saw something in the New York Times this morning in which the Mamdani administration is talking about depositing $3,000 in every newborn's college account or something like that. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be better to like take all that money and just make public college in New York City free? I mean,
Uh-huh.
is that what we need to be doing to support people is to create these individuated solutions that may or may not in the end amount to anything. Um, and or is it better to take our resources and begin to build out the kinds of infrastructure that say, mayors like Fiorello LaGuardia imagined for educating children and housing children and so on? Are those bigger lifts the thing that needs to happen to lift of the birth rate? Which I agree. I'm an older person. I am supported by the earnings of younger
Uh-huh.
people in part. So, so is that what we really need, or are these ideological strategies going to somehow persuade people?
Well, public financing of child care would be, I think, a really important thing for a lot
Yeah,
of young families, given how expensive
yeah.
childcare has become. And then if you look back to the period after the Second World War, which I don't want to romanticize or idealize, but one of the good things about that era in the 1950s was that it really was a child oriented period. We built
Hmm.
a lot of schools. We provided support for higher education. Um, that was also an era, of course, when we had the highest rate of unionization and the highest income tax rate in all of American history. Two
Yeah.
things that this administration does not want to bring back.
Right.
But
Right.
those were things that directed income toward working people, that gave them more security in their jobs, that gave them opportunities for social mobility. Those were all things that I think in that post war period gave people a reason to believe that things would be better
Yes.
and things would be better for their kids. And
Yes.
they had they had uh, a rational basis for hope. And that's the point that I end this article on. That what people most need is grounds for hope, and that having children is a choice about the future. It's a choice about your own future, but it's a choice about a future you'll never live to see.
Mhm.
And when you have more hope for that future, it seems to me you're more likely to have children.
So I want to end on that question of hope, and I want to ask you a question that goes beyond this article, which is, there are a great many Republicans who got elected on the white replenishment agenda. They weren't calling it that, but certainly anti-immigration, certainly the idea that there were foreigners who had taken things from Americans that they didn't deserve and that really belonged to people who had lived here since the revolution and so on and so forth. We have a Democratic Party that seems to have a lot of different messages, many of which are being locally very effective. If you were talking to the Democratic National Committee and giving them advice on how to give people hope, what would you tell them?
So I'm going to use a phrase that I've used in articles in the American Prospect for some time, which is the idea of a New Deal for the young. The New Deal created a lot of good things like Social Security,
Hmm.
but it wasn't especially oriented toward young people.
Yes.
And and I think a theme that would be an important theme from the point of view of looking to the future, looking to renewal, would be this idea of a New Deal for the young that would include things like the public financing of childcare. That would say, yeah, we do need to have confidence among young people, among young families, and there are concrete things we can do, and frankly, they're worth doing regardless of whether they affect
Yep.
the birth.
Yes.
So, this ought to be, a forward-looking outlook. I don't think there should be a lot of recriminations about exactly what went wrong under Biden or whatever. That's not it. But definitely, a program that looks to the future, that looks to build confidence, looks to increase people's personal economic security. It's not just affordability in the short term.
Yep.
It's this idea, yeah, you can have some confidence,
Yep.
about life and about your family.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And I would just add a program to your New Deal for the Young, which is new national service programs
Uh-huh.
through which young people can pay down student loans or put money aside for medical school or professional school, but most importantly, get their first job through a national service program. Because one of the tough things that I'm seeing for college graduates right now, and certainly people coming out of high school who aren't going to college, is there is this real lack of good jobs for young people, and to have these programs that get young people started in work in a
Yep.
positive way that doesn't feel defeating. Um, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I would
Totally,
add to your New Deal.
totally agree with that, especially because there's panic about AI
Yeah,
eliminating entry level jobs in so many organizations, and not
yeah,
and there's evidence that this is indeed happening. Uh,
yes,
so yeah,
yes.
I think this is absolutely a direction we should be thinking about.
Paul, thank you so much for spending time with us. I want to remind listeners that Paul is one of the co founders of the American Prospect, in which today's article has been published. I'm going to add a link to the article to the post so you can come back, look at show notes, watch this again, read the article. Paul, thanks so much for hanging out with us today.
Claire, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.